A routine demolition on Everett's Mystic River, part of an $800 million dream, turned deadly in a single, shattering moment on October 24, 2025. A lattice-boom crawler crane, engineered to move mountains, suddenly failed, leaving 2 families shattered and a city demanding answers. How could the pride of New England's redevelopment become the site of such devastation? And what invisible flaw set it all in motion? The story begins at exactly 3 p.m. At exactly 3 o'clock, the quiet rhythm of demolition work on the Mystic River was shattered. The barge at 201 Rover Street rocked gently in the autumn current, its steel deck littered with the tools and debris of a day's labor. Overhead, the lattice-boom crawler crane loomed, its open grid of steel trusses silhouetted against a sky streaked with high, thin clouds. Then, without warning, a single, violent sound split the air. Witnesses described it as a crack, louder than any hammer, sharper than any warning siren. In that instant, the massive boom, once held aloft by thick steel cables, began to twist. The scream of metal followed, a drawn-out agony as the lattice structure buckled and tore free. On the barge below, men froze. Some ducked instinctively as the shadow of the boom swept across the deck. Others could only watch as tons of steel crashed down, striking the barge with a force that sent shudders through the water and echoed off the concrete shore. The impact was immediate and absolute. Part of the boom plunged into the river, sending up a plume of cold, silty water. The rest lay tangled across the barge, crushing equipment and pinning everything beneath its weight. For a moment there was nothing but the ringing in people's ears and the groan of settling metal. Then came the silence, a heavy, unnatural quiet that settled over the site. The only movement was the slow drift of the barge, nudged by the river's current, and the ripple of water around twisted steel. The air, thick with the smell of diesel and rust, hung motionless. Time seemed to pause, suspended between the violence of the collapse and the chaos that would soon follow. In those first stunned seconds, the scale of the disaster was impossible to measure. The crane, a machine built to move mountains, had failed in an instant. Its broken form sprawled across the barge and into the river, a stark warning of the danger that now threatened everyone on site. The familiar sounds of industry, engines, shouts, the clatter of tools, were replaced by a silence that spoke of ives changed forever. The Manitowoc 4100W lattice-boom crawler crane is a machine built for force and reach. Its structure is defined by the open truss boom, a long arm made of interlocking steel bars, each member welded or bolted into a triangular grid. This lattice design gives the boom its signature look and strength, allowing it to lift immense weights while keeping its own mass in check. Instead of a solid beam, the boom's framework spreads the load, channeling tension and compression through every steel bar. The result is a structure that can stretch high above a work site, yet remain light enough to move and adjust as needed. Running from the tip of the boom back to the mast, the luffing cables are the crane's lifelines. Each cable is a thick steel wire rope, built from dozens of smaller strands twisted together for flexibility and strength. Their job is ceaseless. Every lift, every swing, every pause puts them under enormous tension, sometimes tens of thousands of pounds. Over time, these cables flex and twist, collecting the marks of hard use. Corrosion, fatigue, or a missed lubrication can weaken a single strand, and if one cable fails, the entire balance of the crane is threatened. Beneath it all, the crawler base gives the crane its name and mobility. Heavy steel tracks let the machine move across rough ground, or, as in Everett, onto a floating barge. A barge is never truly still. The Mystic River's current, shifting tides, and the wake of passing boats all keep the platform in subtle motion. Every movement of the crane is magnified by the water below, introducing stresses that solid ground would never create. The floating base means every load, every swing, every gust of wind must be calculated with care. Ballast tanks are filled or emptied to keep the deck level, but even a small shift can erase the safety margin in an instant. After a collapse, investigators focus on these elements: the cables, the boom, and the records of every inspection and repair. Each piece tells a story of forces endured and stresses survived. On a river, with the world in motion beneath it, the lattice-boom crawler crane is always being tested, its strength measured against the relentless forces of steel, water, and time. The first emergency call reached dispatchers less than a minute after the collapse. Everett fire crews, led by a rescue lieutenant, arrived to a scene that was anything but stable. The barge, weighed down by twisted steel, drifted in the slow current, its deck slick with river water and diesel. The air temperature hovered in the mid-50s, but the water beneath was colder still, just above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. For divers, that meant limited time before hypothermia set in, even with protective gear. As firefighters scrambled to secure the barge, the rescue lieutenant faced a grim calculation. The lattice boom had punched through the deck, sending a web of steel and cable into the river. No one could say for certain whether the structure would shift again, or if the barge might begin to list or sink. Every step on the deck risked triggering another collapse. The situation was grim. Boston's dive team arrived with specialized gear, dry suits, full-face masks, and underwater communications. Their task was to search the murky water for survivors or victims, but visibility was nearly zero. Silt and rust clouded the river, and the debris field extended well beyond the sunken boom. Each diver carried a safety line, tethered to the surface, in case the current or shifting wreckage trapped them below. The cold bit through gloves and hoods, numbing fingers and slowing movement. The divers were relentless. The rescue lieutenant coordinated efforts from the barge's edge, radio in hand, his voice steady but tense. He called for spotters to watch the boom for any sign of movement. Divers checked every pocket of the submerged wreck, feeling their way through jagged steel in darkness. The fear of a secondary collapse hung over every decision. Watching and waiting became a matter of survival. Above water, paramedics and firefighters stood ready, but their own footing was uncertain. The deck pitched with the river's motion, and the entire structure groaned under the weight of the fallen crane. Every minute in the water increased the risk for both the trapped workers and the rescuers themselves. The operation was a race against time, cold, and the unpredictable hazards of a site still in motion. This was a race. Only when the scene was finally stabilized could investigators begin their work. But on that afternoon, it was the resolve and caution of the rescue teams, risking their lives in the cold, unstable waters of the Mystic, that defined the first response. Within hours of the collapse, federal investigators from OSHA arrived at the Everett site, their first task to secure the wreckage and begin the painstaking process of evidence collection. The failed luffing cable, still draped over twisted steel, was carefully cut away and sealed in labeled bags. Every length of wire and every broken fitting was cataloged and logged under strict chain of custody protocols. As one OSHA compliance officer said, "Our job is to preserve every detail. A single strand can reveal months or years of history." The next phase moved from the riverbank to Knott Laboratory, where a team of forensic metallurgists began to examine the failed cable. Under bright lights and powerful magnification, they searched for clues, tiny pits of corrosion, the faint striations of metal fatigue, or the absence of lubrication that should have protected the steel from the relentless assault of salt water and air. Using scanning electron microscopes, they scanned fracture surfaces at thousands of times magnification. Pitting, Small cavities etched by rust can act as the starting point for cracks that spread invisibly through the wire, weakening it long before the final snap. Tensile tests were set up on samples from the same batch of cable, measuring how much force the steel could withstand before breaking. That data will help determine whether the cable lost strength over time or whether a manufacturing flaw played a role. Metallurgists also prepared cross-sections of the wire, polishing and etching them to reveal the depth of corrosion and the pattern of internal damage. Each finding was documented, photographed, and compared to industry standards for marine cranes. Meanwhile, investigators from OSHA pored over inspection logs and maintenance records seized from the site. They looked for gaps in documentation, missed inspections, skipped lubrication, or overdue replacements. In a complex project with layers of contractors and subcontractors, the question of who signed off on the last cable inspection is rarely straightforward. Incomplete or inconsistent records can point to systemic failures rather than a single oversight. As the laboratory search continued, the focus remained on the facts. No conclusions will be drawn until every test is complete and every record reviewed. But the evidence, bagged, tagged, and under the microscope, will form the backbone of whatever accountability follows. As one metallurgist put it, "Steel tells its own story. Our job is to listen." The collapse on the Mystic River triggered not only a technical investigation, but a financial reckoning that would ripple through every company tied to the Everett Docklands project. The immediate aftermath left behind a tangled mass of steel and a sunken barge, but the true cost would be tallied in boardrooms and courtrooms for months to come. Site cleanup alone is projected to reach $100 million. This figure covers the removal of wreckage from the river, environmental remediation for any fuel or hydraulic fluid that entered the water, and the specialized work required to dismantle and transport the remains of the crane and barge. The location itself, a former fuel terminal, complicates every step. Decades of industrial use have left the soil and riverbed contaminated, and demolition debris now mixes with hazardous legacy waste. Environmental contractors must operate under strict federal and state oversight, with every load of removed material tested and tracked. These costs are not theoretical. They are calculated line by line in emergency contracts and environmental compliance reports. The crane, a Manitowoc lattice-boom crawler, was itself a major asset. Valued at $250,000, its destruction represents a total loss for the equipment owner, whether that is the primary contractor charter contracting or a leasing company. Insurance may cover part of the replacement, but deductibles and depreciation mean the payout rarely matches the real cost of putting a comparable machine back into service. For a demolition project of this scale, the loss of a heavy crawler crane is more than a line item. It halts work, delays schedules, and triggers penalty clauses in the contracts that link Everett Landco, the project owner, to every contractor and subcontractor on site. Liability exposure, however, goes far beyond equipment and cleanup. With 2 workers killed, the potential for wrongful death claims and OSHA fines is measured in millions. Legal experts estimate that total liability could exceed $10 million, especially if investigators find lapses in inspection, maintenance, or safety oversight. The web of responsibility includes Everett Landco, charter contracting, and at least one unnamed subcontractor, the direct employer of the victims. Each layer in this chain distances itself from daily site hazards, but all may be called to account in civil court or regulatory hearings. Workers' compensation will provide some relief to the families, but no insurance can restore what was lost. Behind every number lies a signature on a contract, a policy, or a safety checklist. The Everett collapse has forced every institution involved, owners, contractors, insurers, to confront the true cost of a single failure. As the investigation continues, the financial consequences mount, setting the stage for the most painful reckoning of all: the families left behind. Paul Ledwell Jr. started his days before dawn, driving north from Middleborough with a thermos of coffee and a lunch packed by his wife. He was 37, a second-generation pile driver, and a member of Local 56. Friends say he loved the water, the woods, and the rhythm of work that tied him to both. His two sons, Paul and Vincent, were the reason he kept taking jobs that others might have turned down. For Ledwell, the risks of heavy construction were real, but so was the pride. He followed his father into the trade, learning to read the river, the weight of steel, and the language of machines. At home, he was the father who built tree houses and took his boys fishing on weekends. He never missed a birthday. On the job, he was the one who checked the rigging twice, who reminded new hires to keep their eyes open and their hands clear. That Friday, he called home on his break, promising to be back in time for dinner. Larriston Lake was 44, the quiet backbone of his family in Roslindale. Born in St. Croix, he moved to Boston as a young man, drawn by the promise of steady work and a better life for his children. Lake was an ironworker by trade, known among his crew as a gentle soul who never raised his voice, even under pressure. He was a father of 4, and every morning before heading out, he kissed each child goodbye. His wife remembers the last words she heard from him, a soft promise to call at lunch, a promise he could not keep. Lake's friends recall his patience, his willingness to help anyone struggling with a tough lift or a long shift. He sent money home to relatives in St. Croix, keeping family ties strong across the miles. For Lake, the union was more than a paycheck. It was a brotherhood, a source of pride and protection in a dangerous line of work. Both men were working the river that afternoon, not just for themselves, but for the futures of their children. The job was supposed to bring new beginnings to Everett, but for two families, it brought only loss. The union posted a statement mourning their deaths, but no words can fill the silence left behind. The fathers who built foundations for others will not see their own children grow. In the aftermath, co-workers gathered on the dock, heads bowed, recalling the laughter and stories shared in break rooms and on long drives home. The weight of what was lost cannot be measured in contracts or cleanup costs. It lives in the empty seats at dinner tables, in the birthdays missed, and in the quiet moments when children ask for their fathers. For the families of Paul Ledwell Jr. and Larriston Lake, the cost of safety failures is not a number. It is a permanent absence. Right now, thousands of lattice-boom cranes operate across American job sites, many on barges, many aging, all under immense pressure to deliver. As construction accelerates nationwide, routine safety lapses hold deadly potential. The cost of progress is measured not just in dollars, but in lives forever altered. In the end, no ambition justifies forgetting the men behind the machines. Share your perspective below.